All right, so today we're diving deep into something that, honestly, every pilot low-key dreads, continued VFR into IMC.
Yeah.
It's like you're cruising along, enjoying that beautiful VFR view, and bam,
Yeah.
visibility drops, clouds surround you, and you're basically flying blind.
Yeah, it's like walking into a wall, isn't it?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Basically, it's when a pilot flying under visual flight rules, VFR, ends up in a situation where they really should be under instrument flight rules, IFR.
Right.
And we're going to unpack all of that today. We've got some awesome sources, articles from SK Library, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, that's chaos to say for you aviation geeks out there, and a few other tidbits to spice things up.
Right.
The mission, if you will, is to really understand the dangers hiding behind this whole CVFR into IMC thing, those common traps pilots fall into, and most importantly, how to stay safe up there.
Right.
So what's really wild about this, and maybe you can shed some light on this, is that it's not always about a pilot making a conscious bad decision.
Right.
Sometimes the weather just throws a curveball.
Yeah, absolutely. The weather can deteriorate so rapidly, so unexpectedly,
Right.
that a VFR pilot who took off in perfect conditions could suddenly find themselves in a situation they're just not equipped to handle.
Right.
And we call that inadvertent entry into instrument meteorological conditions. And that's a recipe for, well, disaster, really.
So imagine you're up there, relying on your sight, on those visual references to navigate.
Yeah.
And suddenly, they're gone.
Gone.
Poof. No horizon, no ground, just clouds.
Yeah.
Why is that so terrifying for a VFR pilot who's not trained for that?
Well, it triggers something called spatial disorientation.
Right.
Which, I mean, it sounds fancy, but it basically means your brain's getting tricked.
Okay.
Your inner ear, which is responsible for your balance, right? It starts sending all these messed up signals because it's not getting the visual cues it relies on.
Oh, I see.
So suddenly, up isn't up, down isn't down, and you might think you're climbing when you're actually descending, or turning when you're actually flying straight.
Whoa.
And that is incredibly dangerous because you can completely lose control of the aircraft.
Yeah, that sounds, that sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And this isn't just some theoretical risk.
No.
I mean, we're talking about real accidents, real consequences.
Right. The FAA has found that spatial disorientation is a factor in, get this, about 15% of general aviation accidents.
Wow.
And here's the scary part. 90% of those are fatal.
Oh, my God.
I mean, that alone, that number alone should make any pilot, stop and really think twice about the risks of flying into IMC.
90% is just a stark, stark reminder of how dangerous this situation can be. And it's not like it's just a few isolated incidents either.
Yeah, not at all.
The AOPA's NEL report, it shows that even though only 4% of general aviation accidents are directly weather-related, those accidents account for a full 25% of all fatalities. That's a quarter, and that's massive.
It's a big chunk. Yeah.
So zooming in on those VFR flights that end up in IMC specifically, the numbers are even more grim.
They are, unfortunately. You're looking at half of all weather-related accidents caused by VFR into IMC. And then brace yourself, 72% of those are fatal.
Wow.
It really drives home the point that this is a life or death situation, you know?
Right, right. So let's talk about why this happens. Why do pilots fly into IMC in the first place?
Well, there's this thing, we call it get-there-itis in aviation. Powerful force, it can override even the most sensible pilot's judgment. It's that urge to reach the destination no matter what, and it's often fueled by time constraint or the perceived cost of diverting.
Right, right.
Sometimes pilots convince themselves they can make it. They underestimate how quickly the weather can change.
Yeah.
And they overestimate their own abilities.
Classic I can handle it mentality. But IMC, as we've seen, it's not a joke. Overconfidence can have really, really serious consequences.
Absolutely. And then you've also got to factor in poor situational awareness.
Right.
Which can lead pilots to misjudge or even completely miss the signs of deteriorating weather.
Right.
And then you add external pressures, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe you have eager passengers or you just feel that internal pressure to stick to the original plan.
Right, right.
All of that can lead to, you know, a recipe for disaster.
So how do we break free from this cycle of risky behavior? What can a VFR pilot do to avoid ending up in this nightmare scenario?
I think the key lies in really meticulous pre-flight planning.
Okay, walk me through that. What are the essential steps a VFR pilot should take before even starting the engine?
Well, information is power, especially when it comes to weather.
Right.
So before you even set foot in that aircraft, you need to gather as much weather data as you possibly can.
Oh.
area forecasts, wind forecasts, terminal aerodrome forecasts, we call those TAFs, and then the very detailed meteorological terminal aviation reports, those are the METARs.
Right.
And you need those for both your destination and any alternate airfields. You need a very clear picture of the weather you might encounter throughout your entire flight.
So it's more than just a quick check of the weather app on your phone. We're talking about digging deep, really understanding those nuances of the forecast.
Absolutely. Got to understand those nuances. And there's a crucial step that a lot of pilots, they just kind of skip over. And that is calculating your minimum VFR altitude to continue. This is the lowest altitude you can safely fly while staying in VFR conditions. It's like a safety buffer. You need to factor in the terrain, obstacles along your route, and of course the weather conditions. Having that number in your mind, it helps you make good decisions when you're up in the air.
So it's like setting a hard limit, point of no return.
Yeah, like below this, you're entering dangerous territory.
But it's not just about staying above the clouds, right?
Right.
You've also got to think about visibility. Even if you technically meet the minimums for VFR, if visibility is low, that creates a whole other set of challenges. It's like driving in fog.
Yeah.
You might be legally allowed to drive, but it's incredibly risky.
Very good analogy. Very good analogy.
What about fuel? How does fuel planning come into play when we're trying to avoid IMC?
It's, I think, the unsung hero of aviation safety. You always want to make sure you have enough fuel, not just for your planned route,
Right.
but also for any diversions, any unexpected delays.
Right.
Because if the weather changes and you have to change course, you need the fuel to do it safely.
It's like always better to have more than you think you'll need, just in case.
Absolutely. Always.
So we've done our pre-flight planning, checked the weather, calculated our minimum altitudes, but despite our best efforts, the unexpected happens.
Happens.
We find ourselves in IMC. What are the immediate steps a VFR pilot should take to try to regain control of the situation?
Well, the first thing, and it's probably the hardest, is to accept that you are, for all intents and purposes, in IMC.
Okay.
You're in it.
But how do you know for sure? What are the signs that you've crossed the line from VFR to IMC?
Well, it's more than just physically being inside a cloud. If you're finding it tough to keep control of the aircraft's attitude, or if you can't rely on visual cues anymore to navigate, you are effectively in IMC.
Okay.
And that's regardless of whether you're actually in a cloud or not.
Okay, so we've acknowledged, okay, we're in IMC.
Yep.
Now what?
Now, this is where those instrument flying skills, or the lack thereof, come into play. You need to, and I mean immediately, transition from visual flying to instrument flying. You've got to rely on those instruments in the cockpit to maintain control of the aircraft, especially that attitude indicator. It's crucial. Yeah, it's like switching from driving by sight to suddenly having to drive with your eyes closed. Relying solely on the GPS and other instruments to guide you,
Yeah.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Right. So focus on the instruments, especially that attitude indicator you were talking about.
Right.
What else can we do to stabilize the situation? I mean, I'd be freaking out.
Yeah, well, the natural urge is to try and find a way out of those clouds right away.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But you've got to resist that.
Okay.
It's a distraction. Your priority right now is to fly the airplane.
Right. Fly the plane. Don't get distracted. Stay calm.
Exactly.
Okay, what's next?
The next step is a classic maneuver drilled into every instrument pilot, the 180-degree turn.
Oh, yeah, the 180.
Get you back to those clear skies you left behind.
Sounds simple enough, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just yanking the stick and hoping for the best.
Yeah, you can't just wing it, that's for sure. Executing a safe 180 in IMC, it takes planning, precision, and trust in your instruments.
Okay, so talk me through it. What are the key steps to nailing this maneuver?
So before you even touch the controls, you need to plan your escape route. Think about the terrain on either side of your current flight path. High ground to your left, turn right. You want to choose the direction that gives you the most clearance, minimizes the risk of hitting something you can't see.
So situational awareness is still key.
Always.
We need that mental picture of what's around us even when we can't see it.
Exactly. Next, you need to choose a specific heading for rolling out of your turn.
Okay.
Use your heading bug, or note the heading on your directional indicator or your HSI.
Right.
Having that target heading, it gives you a clear goal, prevents you from overshooting the turn.
Got it. So planning, especially under pressure, that's crucial.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've got a plan. Now, how do we actually do the turn? Any specific techniques?
Smoothness. Smoothness is key.
Okay.
You want to start the turn with a gentle bank, no more than 15 degrees, and maintain that angle throughout the whole maneuver. Laser focus on that attitude indicator.
Right.
That's what's going to keep you from entering a spiral dive.
Gotcha. No sudden movements, smooth and controlled, eyes on the attitude indicator.
You got it. And really important, keep your airspeed constant during the turn.
Okay.
Find that sweet spot and hold it. Helps you keep the aircraft stable, predictable, which is super important when you're dealing with the stress of IMC.
Right. We don't need any extra complications. Okay, let's say we've done our 180, textbook, perfect, but we're still in the clouds. What then?
If that 180 doesn't get you back to VFR conditions, it's time to call for help.
Time to admit defeat.
Yeah, basically. Don't hesitate. Declare Mayday. Let ATC know you're a VFR pilot in IMC.
Reach out to ATC, declare an emergency. Okay, what's the best way to talk to them to make sure we get back safe?
You got to cooperate. ATC, they are your best friend right now. They're your eyes in the sky. They're going to guide you back to safety. Follow their instructions. Keep your transmissions clear and concise. And don't try to be a hero.
Okay, cooperate, follow instructions. Got it.
Yeah.
Anything else we should keep in mind when we're talking to ATC?
Be honest. Let them know you're not instrument rated, that you need help getting back to VFR conditions. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't try any fancy maneuvers unless they specifically tell you to.
Okay.
Keep your flying simple and predictable.
Simple, straightforward flying, clear communication. This is starting to feel a lot less scary.
That's the power of knowledge and preparation.
Right. So we've stabilized the aircraft, tried the 180, called for help. Now we're waiting for ATC's instructions. Anything we can do in the meantime to, improve our odds, minimize the stress?
One thing SK Library really emphasizes is focusing on the attitude indicator. It's your main source of info about the aircraft's orientation. In this situation, it's even more important than the altimeter or the airspeed indicator.
So if we have to pick one instrument to focus on, it's the attitude indicator.
Absolutely, because it tells you if your wings are level, if the nose is pointing up or down.
Right.
Crucial for preventing those dangerous attitudes that can lead to a loss of control.
It's like trust your instruments even when they lie to you.
Well, hopefully they're not lying. But the point is, trust them over your senses, which, let's face it, can be really unreliable in IMC.
Makes sense. Any other practical tips for those, nail-biting moments while we're waiting?
If there's any chance of icing, don't forget about your ice protection system.
Right.
Activate pitot heat to stop ice from blocking the pitot tube, and use carburetor heat to prevent ice buildup in the engine.
So even in the middle of an emergency, we can't forget about icing.
No way. Icing can turn a bad situation into a catastrophe. You want to avoid that at all costs.
Absolutely. Now, back to that 180 for a second. We talked about planning it, keeping the bank shallow, keeping the airspeed steady. Any other tips for making it smooth and safe?
Use your turn coordinator or the turn and slip indicator.
Right.
It helps you judge the rate of turn. Make sure you're not turning too quickly or too slowly.
So while we're focusing on the attitude indicator, we can use those other instruments to fine-tune the maneuver.
Exactly. It's all about balance, relying on the instruments while still maintaining that situational awareness.
Right. Okay, so we've tried the 180, we're talking to ATC, and we're doing our best to stay calm. What else can we do to increase our chances of a good outcome?
Try to maintain a level altitude if you can. It'll help you avoid controlled flight into terrain, one of the biggest dangers in IMC.
Right. We don't want to fly into a mountain because we're disoriented.
Exactly. You've got to be vigilant about monitoring your altitude, make small adjustments to stay level.
Constant altitude awareness.
Yeah.
Got it. Any other proactive steps we can take while we're waiting?
If it's safe, consider climbing to a higher altitude.
Really? I would think descending would be the way to go in an emergency.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but climbing can actually help.
Okay, how so?
Well, it might take you above the clouds. Gives you a chance to regain those visual references, maybe even continue the flight under VFR.
So we could actually climb our way out of trouble.
It's possible. And even if you can't get above the clouds, gaining altitude buys you time.
Right.
Puts you in a better position to work with ATC. Higher altitudes usually mean more airspace, fewer obstacles, gives ATC more options to maneuver you safely.
More altitude, more options, more time. I like it. But we need to make sure we have enough clearance to climb safely.
Of course, always. You got to be aware of your surroundings, any airspace restrictions. Before you climb, double check your charts. Make sure you're not going to conflict with other aircraft or bust any airspace.
Safety first, always. So we've stabilized the aircraft, tried the 180, declared an emergency, and now we're either maintaining altitude or climbing to a safer one while we wait for ATC. What else should we be thinking about?
It might sound cliche, but try to relax, stay calm.
Easier said than done, I know, but panicking won't help. How do you stay calm when you're surrounded by clouds and your heart is racing?
Go through your emergency checklist. Even if you've already done it mentally, physically going through those steps can help you focus, regain a sense of control.
Right.
It can also help you remember things you might have missed in the heat of the moment.
So review the checklist, focus on the instruments, and try to channel my inner Zen master.
Exactly.
Anything else.
And try to avoid fixating on finding a way out of the clouds.
Right.
It's tempting to scan for a break in the overcast, but it can distract you from the important stuff, flying the plane and talking to ATC. Plus, it can lead to visual illusions and make the disorientation worse.
Okay, so trust the instruments, trust ATC, and don't play hide and seek with the clouds.
Exactly.
This is all great advice. Really feels like we're building a toolkit for handling this situation.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power, and in aviation, it can literally be the difference between life and death.
Well said. So we've covered a lot. The perils of CVFR into IMC, pre-flight planning, and how to handle those moments when you're in the soup. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to safety.
You're right. There's always more to learn, and complacency can be dangerous.
Absolutely. What are the key takeaways we want our listeners to remember?
First and foremost, CVFR into IMC is a serious hazard, but it's not unbeatable.
Right.
Knowledge, preparation, and caution can go a long way in preventing it.
And if you do find yourself in IMC,
stay calm, trust your instruments, and call for help.
ATC is our friend.
Exactly. They're there to help you get back safely. And lastly, never stop learning. Aviation's always changing, and the more we learn, the safer we become.
Absolutely. And of course, nothing beats hands-on training with a qualified flight instructor. Building and maintaining your instrument proficiency is crucial.
It's an investment in your safety.
So before we wrap up, one final question for you and for our listeners. Knowing the dangers of CVFR into IMC, and with all the knowledge we've talked about today, how will you change your approach to flight planning and decision-making in the future?
That's a great question to think about. It's all about taking this knowledge and putting it into action.
You know, it's kind of crazy how a little change in weather or a small lapse in judgment can turn into a life or death situation up there.
It really is.
It just shows how important mental preparedness is, just as much as those technical skills, to staying safe when you're flying.
Absolutely. The mental game is huge in aviation.
So let's talk about that for a bit. What are some of those psychological factors that can lead a pilot to that, oh crap, I'm VFR and IMC moment?
Well, we talked about get-there-itis, right?
Yeah.
That pressure to reach your destination no matter what. It can come from you, it can come from passengers, and it can really mess with your judgment, make you downplay risks you wouldn't normally even consider.
It's like you're so focused on getting there, you forget that the real goal is getting there safely.
Exactly. And, for experienced pilots, overconfidence can be a real trap.
Yeah, I could see that.
You start thinking you can handle anything, that the rules don't apply to you.
Right.
And that's when you start pushing the limits, taking shortcuts, and suddenly you're in way over your head.
It's a slippery slope. And then there are those external pressures too, like maybe a client's waiting or you're trying to impress someone.
You're right.
Whatever it is, letting those outside forces influence your decisions, it can be a recipe for disaster.
No doubt about it.
So how do you fight those mental traps? How can you make sure you're making those rational safety-first decisions, even when you're under pressure?
One of the best tools is a personal minimums checklist.
I've heard of those, but remind me, what exactly are they and how can they help here?
Think of it as your own personal set of boundaries when you're flying. It goes beyond just the legal requirements. It's about setting limits for yourself for things like weather, aircraft performance, and other factors that affect safety, and then sticking to those limits no matter what.
So it's like drawing a line in the sand and saying, I won't fly in conditions worse than this, period.
Exactly. You might decide, for example, you'll never take off if the crosswind is above a certain speed.
All right.
Or you might set a minimum cloud ceiling that you'll follow, even if the legal minimum is lower.
That makes sense. It takes the guesswork out of decision-making, especially when you're stressed. It's like a built-in safety net.
Exactly. And what's great about a personal minimums checklist is that it's tailored to you.
Right.
It reflects your skills, your experience, your comfort level. It's not one size fits all.
So it's a living document.
Yeah.
Something that can evolve as you gain more experience and confidence. Okay, so creating that checklist is a great first step. What else can we do to build up that mental strength and avoid those psychological traps?
You have to Develop a healthy respect for the weather. We need to acknowledge that weather is a powerful force and it can change so quickly. It's not about conquering the weather, it's about respecting it, working within its limits.
Working with it, not against it.
Exactly. Take those weather forecasts seriously. Be willing to change your plans if the conditions get worse. Sometimes the safest decision is the one that's least convenient or might disappoint someone. But at the end of the day, as pilots, our responsibility is to prioritize safety above all else.
Couldn't agree more. So we've got our personal minimums, we're staying weather-wise. What else can we do to make sure we're making the smart choices and avoiding the things that can lead to CVFR into IMC?
That's where good risk management techniques come in.
Okay, risk management. That's a big topic. Any specific strategies we can use when we're planning a flight to assess and manage the risks?
One helpful framework is the PAVE checklist. Stands for pilot, aircraft, environment, and external pressure. And if you consider each of those factors carefully, you can identify potential risks and figure out how to manage them.
Okay, let me break it down. Starting with pilot, what kind of questions should we be asking ourselves?
When it comes to the pilot, it's all about honest self-assessment.
Right.
Are you well-rested?
Okay.
Are you feeling stressed or anxious?
Mm-hmm.
Are you taking any medications that might affect your judgment or performance? Because a pilot who is tired, stressed, or just not at their best is more likely to make mistakes.
So it's not just about your skills, it's about your overall well-being.
Exactly. Now, for the aircraft, you need to think about things like its maintenance, its capabilities, and if it's even right for the flight you're planning. Are there any known mechanical issues?
Yeah.
Is it properly equipped for the weather you might encounter? Asking those questions can help you catch potential problems before they turn into emergencies.
So those pre-flight inspections, they're not just routine, they're a critical part of managing risk.
Absolutely. Now, environment, we're not just talking about weather, although that's a big part of it.
Right.
You also have to think about terrain, airspace restrictions, and airport conditions.
This is where our knowledge of the weather and our route really comes in handy.
Exactly. Study those forecasts, know the potential hazards, and always have a backup plan in case the weather changes.
Always have those alternate airports in mind.
Exactly. And then there are those external pressures we talked about. This is where you have to be assertive. You have to be willing to say no, even to important people, if you think a flight is unsafe.
It's about putting safety above everything else, no matter what.
Exactly. Your main responsibility is to yourself and your passengers. Never risk lives just to save time or make someone happy.
This has been such a great conversation. We've talked about the technical stuff of handling IMC, those psychological things that can lead to bad decisions, and some really practical ways to manage risk.
It's been great.
We've covered a lot, but remember, folks, learning never stops in aviation.
Never.
So keep exploring these topics, find more resources, and most importantly, keep training. Stay curious, stay safe, and keep those wings level.
Well said.
That's a perfect way to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into CVFR, into IMC. Fly safe, everyone.